Pranks are often framed as harmless jokes, but in these cases, the actions that were meant to embarrass or scare resulted in fatal outcomes. This episode examines the 6 worst deaths caused by pranks. It was July 26, 2016, in downtown Scottsdale, Arizona. An active heat advisory pushed temperatures near 104 degrees Fahrenheit as dense nightlife crowds filled busy sidewalks late into the evening. Megan Foster had just turned 28. She worked as an assistant property manager and had traveled to Scottsdale for a birthday weekend planned by friends. Earlier in the evening, the group helped promote a bar they were meeting at by taping flyers and posters to light poles along a busy block. Megan volunteered to help. She was sober enough to focus, moving from pole to pole with a roll of tape in her hand. As Megan stood facing a metal lamppost, smoothing a poster flat, one friend stepped behind her and pulled the tape away. Another laughed and suggested taping Megan to the pole as a birthday joke. Before she could turn around, a strip of tape was wrapped across her midsection, pinning her lightly in place. At first, witnesses said she continued smiling and did not immediately resist. Instead, the prank escalated. The materials weren't standard tape. The group had brought industrial pallet wrap and reinforced duct tape to keep posters from peeling in the heat. One friend circled the pole, winding the plastic tightly around Megan's torso. Pallet wrap compresses as it's pulled, and with each pass, pressure increased around her chest and abdomen. Megan protested and told them to stop. She said it wasn't funny and asked to be let go. The response was laughter and reassurances that it would only last a minute. Duct tape was added over the plastic to prevent it from loosening. Her arms were pinned to her sides. Another strip bound her legs together, preventing her from shifting her weight. Within moments, Megan was fully immobilized against the pole. Several minutes passed as people walked by. In the extreme heat, her breathing quickened, but the wrap restricted her chest from expanding, limiting how much oxygen her body could take in. At first, she tried to keep laughing, playing along. Pedestrians walked past. A few slowed down. Some glanced, shrugged, and kept moving. From a distance, it looked staged, like a harmless prank or a street promotion no one needed to stop. Witnesses later said Megan's posture changed, her head tilted forward, her shoulders slumped. But the wrap held her upright. She stopped speaking, her knees bent slightly, but the tape at her legs kept her from collapsing. From across the street, her friends thought she was staying in character. When one of them finally walked closer, Megan wasn't responding. They rushed in and tried to pull the wrap apart, but pallet wrap tightens when tugged. The duct tape reinforced it. Cutting through the layers took time. Megan lost consciousness before they freed her. Emergency crews arrived within minutes of the call. Megan had no pulse. Resuscitation attempts continued on scene and during transport, but she was pronounced dead shortly after. The medical examiner ruled the cause of death as restrictive and positional asphyxia, with heat stress as a contributing factor. The wrapping prevented her chest from expanding enough to meet her body's oxygen needs. As her temperature rose, her oxygen demand increased. Her body couldn't compensate. Investigators found no defects with the pole or the surrounding area. The materials used, pallet wrap and duct tape, were collected as evidence. Statements confirmed Megan had not agreed to be restrained and did not know the prank was coming. 2 friends were later charged with involuntary manslaughter. It was March 27, 2015, during spring break on a crowded beach in South Padre Island, Texas. Music drifted across the sand, coolers sat open, and groups clustered near the shoreline. Some dug shallow pits near the water, while others posed for photos. Ryan Delgado was 20 years old. He was visiting with friends for spring break, staying close to the beach and spending most days outside. Like many groups that week, they wanted something memorable, something amusing they could talk about later. Earlier that afternoon, they started digging a hole a short distance from the waterline. It wasn't planned. Someone joked about digging straight down. Another joined in. Soon it became a group effort. Near the surface, the sand was dry and loose. Lower down, it grew heavier and more compact, darkened by moisture and pressure from foot traffic. The sun baked the upper layers while the sand below remained dense and unstable. When they stopped digging, the hole was roughly 6 feet deep with smooth vertical walls. No steps were carved, no boards or supports were added. The hole stood straight down, unsupported, in packed beach sand. At some point, the activity shifted into a prank. The idea sounded harmless. Ryan would stand in the hole while the others buried him partway so it looked like he was stuck, just long enough for a photo. Ryan agreed. Around them, other beachgoers were posing half-covered in sand, and nothing about it appeared dangerous. Ryan climbed into the hole. Sand was shoveled around his legs, then his waist. As it reached his chest, his arms pressed closer to his sides, though he could still move them. The group continued adding sand. The burial went higher. Sand rose past his shoulders, pinning his arms against his torso. His posture stiffened as movement became limited, but the prank continued. Within moments, he was fully immobilized, held upright by the packed sand. From a distance, the scene appeared staged. Like a deliberate beach joke, no one needed to stop. Attention drifted away from the hole. Phones were raised to capture Ryan's face and the surrounding reactions. No one remained beside the pit. The walls went unmonitored. Foot traffic passed close behind, loosening grains along the rim. Thin fissures formed along the rear wall as the incoming tide darkened the lower sand and increased its weight. Then the rear wall failed. Without warning, the sand collapsed inward, pouring into the hole and driving into Ryan's torso and abdomen. Witnesses heard a sharp gasp as the impact forced the air from his lungs. He tried to inhale, but his chest no longer moved. The sand compressed his chest from all sides, locking his rib cage and diaphragm in place. His arms were pinned. His head was free, but without air. He couldn't shout. His chest did not rise, and no sound came from his attempts to breathe as the sand compressed his rib cage. When his friends realized something was wrong, they rushed back and began digging with their hands, shouting his name. Each scoop caused more sand to slide inward, refilling the space around his body. Nearby beachgoers ran over. Someone called for lifeguards. Lifeguards arrived and coordinated the dig, carefully clearing sand from Ryan's chest and shoulders to prevent further collapse. When he was pulled free, he was unresponsive and had no pulse. Resuscitation attempts on the beach were unsuccessful. Ryan Delgado was pronounced dead at the scene. The medical examiner ruled the cause of death as mechanical asphyxiation from chest compression. The weight of the sand prevented his lungs from expanding. Investigators noted that in sand collapses, unconsciousness can occur in under a minute. What began as a joke escalated past consent, and the consequences arrived without warning. It was April 18, 2016, on a multi-use trail in Eugene, Oregon. The paved path wound through trees and open grass, linking neighborhoods to campus and downtown. By night, streetlights were absent, leaving the trail to runners and cyclists who relied on familiarity rather than visibility. That evening, 2 local teenagers, both 17, arrived at the trail with a prank already planned. Messages recovered later showed they had discussed the location, timing, and camera angle earlier in the week. The intent was not theft or confrontation. They were aiming for reactions, startled riders, sudden stops, something they could film from a distance and upload afterward. They brought fishing line, high strength meant for heavy loads. In low light, it was almost invisible. They stretched it tight between 2 trees on opposite sides of the trail, pulling it across at about neck height. Not low enough to trip, high enough that a rider moving fast wouldn't see it in time. One of them hid a phone in the brush, aimed at the trail, ready to capture the funny moment for their small YouTube prank channel. They added no tape, flags, or markers to make the line visible. No warnings were given to anyone using the trail. After securing it, they stepped back into the shadows, started recording, and waited. As dusk settled, Evan Porter entered the trail on his bicycle. He was 21 years old, a college student who rode the path regularly. The route was familiar. He descended the slight grade at speed, as cyclists often do when visibility drops and the path feels routine. The fishing line struck him across the neck at speed. Because it didn't stretch, all the force focused into a narrow point. The impact cut into his throat and snapped his head back. The bike stopped instantly. Evan was thrown forward and sideways, hitting the pavement hard. He tried to breathe. No sound came out. He couldn't call for help. Within moments, he stopped moving. Other trail users arrived seconds later and called for help. Paramedics responded quickly, but the injury was catastrophic. Evan was pronounced dead at the scene. Investigators later recovered the phone, still recording from its hiding place. The fishing line was still tied tightly between both trees. It hadn't broken. The height of the line matched the fatal injury to Evan's neck. What was meant to capture a prank instead documented a death in real time. The medical examiner ruled the cause of death as catastrophic neck trauma, including vascular injury and airway compromise, caused by the collision with the fishing line. The force came from the collision with the line itself. Police later identified the teenagers responsible. Messages on their phones showed the prank had been planned. They discussed hoping someone would freak out or fall, then get angry. There was no indication they expected anyone to be seriously hurt. Investigators noted that the material strength and placement created a lethal hazard at cycling speed. High-strength fishing line does not give way under sudden load. When stretched tight across a path, it acts like a blade. At cycling speed, the neck takes the full impact before the body can react. The death was classified as a homicide, resulting from reckless actions that created a lethal hazard on the trail. The trail was closed temporarily while safety checks were done. No permanent changes could undo what had already happened. It was January 14, 2017, during an overnight shift at a metal fabrication plant in Gary, Indiana, where machines ran continuously amid oil fumes and cooling steel racks. Daniel Harper was 38 years old and worked as a machine operator at the plant, where he had been employed for several years. He was regularly assigned to overnight shifts, which were quieter but physically demanding, requiring long periods on his feet. Co-workers later said that during breaks, Daniel sometimes rested by sitting against the wall with his eyes closed before returning to work. Supervisors were aware of the habit and had warned him about sleeping during breaks. Though no formal discipline followed, on the night of January 14th, several co-workers decided to turn that routine into a joke. The plant provided access to industrial materials, including industrial-grade cyanoacrylate adhesive. According to statements, the adhesive was brought into the break area and treated as a prank meant to inconvenience him, not cause harm. While Daniel slept, adhesive was applied to his hands and face. Adhesive bonded portions of his palms and fingers to his cheeks, restricting hand movement and interfering with his vision. Additional adhesive was smeared across his brow and eyelashes, clumping the lashes and spreading onto surrounding skin. The glue did not seal his eyelids shut, but it would have significantly impaired vision when his eyes opened. When the application was finished, his hands were firmly adhered to his face. The co-workers took a photograph and returned to their stations, leaving Daniel alone in the break area. A short time later, he woke up. Witnesses later described Daniel standing and trying to pull his hands away from his face, but they remained stuck in place. He swayed as he stepped away from the wall. His eyes were partially open, though his vision appeared impaired. Disoriented and with impaired vision, he moved away from the break area and into the active plant floor. Daniel exited into an active section of the plant floor. The area contained operating machinery, steel racks, and narrow walkways. Surveillance cameras showed him moving forward unevenly, brushing against equipment as he walked. Within seconds, he tripped. Daniel fell chest first into a vertical steel cooling rack used to store fabricated metal components. One of the protruding supports penetrated his upper torso on impact. He collapsed beneath the rack and did not move. Nearby workers heard the collision and ran to the area. They found Daniel unresponsive, with adhesive still visible on his hands and face. Emergency services were contacted immediately. Paramedics arrived and attempted life-saving measures, but the injuries were catastrophic. Daniel Harper was pronounced dead at the scene. The medical examiner ruled the cause of death as penetrating chest trauma with rapid blood loss. Adhesive residue was documented on Daniel's hands and facial area, consistent with restricted movement and impaired vision at the time of the fall. Blood transfer patterns and impact marks on the steel rack matched the height, angle, and force of the collision. Investigators reviewed surveillance footage, employee statements, and the plant's layout, finding no evidence that Daniel had been running or violating procedures. The findings showed the prank immediately preceded his impaired movement into an active work area. The death was classified as a prank-caused workplace fatality. Several employees were terminated, and safety policies were revised to ban pranks involving restraint, sensory impairment, or industrial materials. It was June 2, 2018, at a rooftop restaurant in Chicago. Several stories above the street, the dining area was bordered by glass panels and a code-compliant guardrail designed to preserve unobstructed views rather than provide secondary fall protection. As sunset approached, guests gathered along the edge, leaning against the railing to talk and take photos. Stephen Price was 29 years old and worked in logistics for a regional shipping company. He had planned the evening for weeks. He reserved a private corner of the rooftop, coordinated timing with restaurant staff, and brought an engagement ring he had selected months earlier. Friends later stated that he intended to propose after dinner as the sun set over the city. Lauren, 27, agreed to the dinner without being told about the proposal. In a later statement to investigators, she said she had been watching staged proposal rejection prank videos online in the weeks beforehand. She described the idea as a short joke, meant to be revealed almost immediately. Earlier that evening, she positioned a small camera facing the table to record the moment. Dinner proceeded without incident. Plates were cleared, and nearby diners noticed Stephen stand and move toward the side of the table facing the railing. He reached into his jacket and knelt. Several guests nearby turned to watch. According to witness statements, Lauren stood up abruptly and stepped backward toward the railing while delivering the staged rejection. In her later statement, the staged rejection and movement toward the railing were meant to draw Stephen closer. Investigators later reviewed video showing Stephen following her toward the edge. As he reached her, Lauren suddenly leaned forward to embrace him and reveal the prank. The contact shifted Stephen's weight, and his heel caught against the base of the railing, driving his center of gravity forward over the top rail. Despite the barrier's height, his momentum carried him over the edge and out of sight. Shouting followed immediately. Lauren screamed and ran to the edge. Restaurant staff rushed to the area and contacted emergency services. Several diners moved away from the railing while others looked over the side. First responders arrived within minutes. Stephen was located on the pavement below with severe injuries. Paramedics attempted resuscitation, but he was pronounced dead at the scene. The medical examiner ruled the cause of death as multiple blunt force injuries sustained in a high-level fall. Toxicology testing showed no alcohol or drugs in Stephen's system. Investigators reviewed witness statements, the restaurant's layout, and the video recorded at the table. The footage documented Stephen's movement toward the edge, Lauren's backward positioning near the railing, and the moment of physical contact immediately before the fall. There was no evidence of running, jumping, or intentional self-harm. The incident was classified as a prank-caused death. Investigators concluded that the prank introduced physical instability at the edge of the rooftop, in an area with limited fall protection, directly leading to the fatal fall. No criminal charges were filed as investigators found no intent to cause harm and no safety code violations at the time. Following the incident, the restaurant raised the height of its rooftop barriers and updated its safety policies regarding edge seating. The engagement ring was recovered from the table where Stephen had placed it moments before the fall. The prank was never revealed. It was August 9, 2013, at a seasonal water park in rural Pennsylvania. A warm, late summer afternoon drew families and groups through the rides. The most popular attraction was a tall, enclosed free-fall water slide, where riders waited at the top for water flow before pushing off, one at a time. Kyle Benton was 24 years old. He had come to the park with friends, expecting an ordinary summer outing. He wasn't reckless or timid, just careful. At the top of the slide, he hesitated. The height was intimidating. and he paused at the mouth of the chute, sitting in position and waiting for the water signal that meant it was safe to go. The hesitation lasted only a few seconds, but to the friends lined up behind him, it became an opportunity for a prank. Kyle was already seated, waiting for the attendant's go signal as the flow was being controlled nearby. That's when one friend decided to scare him. The park's CCTV review showed a friend laughing behind and lunging forward to shove and grab Kyle. It's a joke meant to force a reaction and send him sliding. But the push came harder than expected. There was no time to grab him back. The shove sent Kyle down the chute before he was ready. The shove was harder than intended. Kyle wasn't braced. He hadn't crossed his arms or aligned his body. The push sent him into the chute off balance, his torso twisted and posture uneven. In a ride designed for controlled entry, the prank removed the one thing that mattered most: control. Inside the slide, the speed built quickly. Free-fall slides rely on smooth alignment to keep riders centered as they descend. Kyle wasn't centered. Midway down, his body struck a transition edge inside the chute, an internal curve where the slide's angle changes. At that speed, the contact was violent. The internal impact produced rapid deceleration forces consistent with cervical spine fracture. The sudden stop and redirection happened inside the slide, not at the pool below. By the time he reached the end, the injury had already occurred. Lifeguards responded immediately when Kyle didn't exit the pool normally. He was unresponsive. Emergency services were called, and first aid began on site. He was transported to a nearby hospital but did not make it. Kyle Benton died from a cervical spine fracture with severe spinal cord injury. In the days that followed, investigators inspected the water slide and found no mechanical defects. The structure, surface, and water flow all met safety standards, and no failure of the ride itself was identified. Witness statements, including those from people at the top of the slide, confirmed that Kyle had been pushed, causing him to enter the chute improperly. Medical findings confirmed that the fatal injury occurred inside the slide during the descent, not from impact with the water below. The sudden internal impact applied enough force to fracture the cervical vertebrae and sever the spinal cord. The park cooperated fully with the investigation, and no charges were filed against the facility. Investigators identified the friend responsible for the shove, but no criminal charges were filed, as the act was determined to be a prank without intent to cause serious harm. The death was ruled accidental in manner, resulting from unauthorized physical interference during ride entry. Thank you for watching. Subscribe for more videos.